Welcome to the SaaS Connect one-on-one podcast. I'm Andrew Porter. I'm here with Pariveda. Pariveda is a technology consulting firm. I'm actually a principal in our alliances team, which oversees our relationships with our account and growth strategy and our partner operations for our main partnerships, which are Microsoft, AWS, and about a dozen other SaaS and software companies. Across our 12 offices, about 80% of our work is actually partner co-sell and co-building projects and applications. And that's really what I'm excited to talk to everybody here today. We're talking about infrastructure, applications, just to set a little context, data platforms and integrations for our clients that range from startups all the way to the global enterprise companies. I'm based out of New York City, and I'm actually a software engineer by trade, but I'm really fortunate to have transitioned into the world of partnerships about 4 years ago. I've invited my colleague, Christy Dockendorf, to join this discussion as well. I'm really fortunate to say that our organizations crossed paths the AWS ecosystem, and specifically, as I was mentioning, within data analytics and machine learning. Christy, how about you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Great, yeah, thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone, I'm Christy, like he said. So I work currently for Lenovo, but Andrew and I met in a previous role of mine at a company based out of San Francisco that features or works in the machine learning and artificial intelligence space. So I'm currently in St. Paul, Minnesota, working remotely, like I said, for Lenovo, but doing partnership, business development and partnerships in both of those roles. So looking forward to having this conversation about some of the ways that Andrew and I successfully partnered with this previous role that I had at this SaaS company.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. A quick shout out, as we were talking about earlier, to the SaaS Connect conference, which is coming up in 2 weeks, April 27th and 28th in my old home, lovely San Francisco. I'll be there, and what I'm specifically looking forward to is I appreciate what Sunir and Lindsay and the rest of the CSA team are doing is they've actually found executive mentors and coaches who are offering one-on-one time, and they're also facilitating roundtable lunches across different themes like platform partnerships, partner business strategy, and things like that. And so I thought that was a really unique take, and I'm looking forward to networking and learning with you all in a couple of weeks. With that, let's just dive right into the topic. We're here today to talk about building SaaS partnerships with services firms. As we kick things off, I wanted to start with a really short story of when I first started in my role. My boss, Christopher Paul, not the basketball player, different Christopher Paul, but he essentially gave the marching orders of take every call I could possibly take with someone who wanted to partner with our firm, Pariveda, and just see how it went. What were they offering? And what did they want in return? And so one of the things I pretty quickly discovered, though, is that the SaaS companies I was talking to, I felt like they were overly focusing on treating services firms as a referral-based sales channel. And I think we all probably know the play. It's let's get some people certified on your SaaS software stack. Let's do some account mapping. Let's do some introductions to your start registering those leads in the partner portals, and I'll take a cut of the subscription that I sell, and I'll give that to the partner, and we can sort of take it from here. Now, I believe and I know that referrals are totally warranted in so many contexts, but it kind of started to drive me a little nuts. Was this really how everybody was doing it, and is this really where the conversation was going to end? I actually ended up coming across some data points that reinforced what I was witnessing as well. And a shout out to Crossbeam, who actually ran this research. The data points they found were 75% of SaaS companies measure success simply as partner generated referral revenue. And also another data point was 88% offer a fraction of their subscription or their licensing, as that primary incentive to the partners. And so that's sort of just the context of the conversation today. I don't think, and I think Christy agrees with me from the software side, is that that model isn't particularly suited for the needs of either partner on that services and SaaS side, let alone the end customer. We're cutting up an existing pie that we probably should be growing together. And so I landed on this perspective that SaaS companies have this opportunity to drive revenue growth, but also improve customer satisfaction by rethinking how they partner with services firms. I thought we had, an opportunity to be far more creative in how we shaped, this particular partnership. And so Christy is definitely like-minded here, and I'm not here to just throw shade on partnerships. I fully recognize that consulting and services firms, it's not all roses and sunshine working for us too. So, do your best here, Christy. But I do see a lot of other innovative, technology integrations happening in partnerships, on that technology side. Maybe I have FOMO, I don't know, but Christy, let's dive into why this is happening. What from your perspective, why are so many SaaS companies taking this pure referral approach, despite some pretty clear inefficiencies?
Yeah, so I think, to start, I think it's just the way that, unfortunately, a bunch of us have all just been trained that this is how partnerships work. And with that, then a lot of our metrics then get run around like number of opportunities, not necessarily the quality of them. So getting these kind of referral-based partnerships in place is what a lot of people are metrics on. I think that this could work depending on, the complexity of the software. I think, if you have a fairly easy software sort of piece that's like kind of a plug and play sort of thing, then yeah, referrals make sense. But I think, we were focusing in the AI ML space, which is very, very complex. And there's a lot of support that's needed around that. And I think that a lot of times, unless at the SaaS company that I worked for, unless we wanted to bring in like our heavy hitter engineers, we really needed to have a services firm to be able to step in and really assist with the rest of the sales motion for us as the bigger picture. But there's definitely some worries that people have in SaaS companies. I've been on calls, especially with the larger GSIs, where they have a need for what we had did in our space for machine learning, which was training data. They learned what we did, and then they're like, "Well, we can build that." And so they took what we basically sold as a product and decided that they were going to build it in-house instead, because they're getting paid on billable hours, right? So I think there needs to be, like a lot of trust between a SaaS company and a services company. And right now, I think just the model, for whatever reason, we're still using, a lot of companies are still using this referral-based model, and it doesn't dig into that trust that we need between the two partners.
Yeah, that's actually, you touch on a couple of really interesting points. I wanted to go back to that. Because I totally agree with you. Like, there's a certain subset of partnerships where it totally makes sense to just purely focused on referrals, ratchet that engine up. But when to your point, when there's like more high complexity solution selling happening, that's probably where there's the biggest gap in, that's where essentially it's unproductive and it's not really working for the SaaS company and the services firm, where there's the biggest opportunity. I wanted to dig in. You mentioned trust as well. What are some specific, barriers to trust, you think, from your perspective on the software side? What are some of those biggest blockers to trust?
Yeah, so when you're working with partners, you're working in tandem with your own sales team. And I think as someone who myself came from software sales, being able to make sure that nothing's going to screw up your commission or the sale that you have is really important. And I think once you get partners and you're adding an extra layer of potential complexity to the sale, that could potentially make the person, like a salesperson, think that it's going to throw off the whole sales motion that they have going on. So I think it's really important too to just have the internal education happening within a SaaS company, saying, here's our trusted partners, here's why we trust them. We had people come on site. I think you guys, I don't know, the pandemic, you guys may have come on site and talked to some of our sales folks as well, just so that they put a face to the company and knew that you weren't going to come in there and cut them out of a deal. And just like that idea of complicating and slowing them, I think as a partner manager, it's really my job to reassure the sales team that this isn't going to happen. And if anything, this is going to uncover more opportunities and more leads for you as we continue on with a services company and your opportunity.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And that it's that ongoing, it's a grind, right? It's to have, you have to constantly be communicating and dripping, the messaging across the organization as well, because, there's so many, I mean, we're all getting who knows how many emails and Slacks every day. It's also a matter of coming, making sure that it becomes a part of their, their trust, but also that they know what the play is in the first place, right? And how do we even engage, right? So once we've even gotten past that trust point. Yeah, that's interesting because go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, on the flip side too, I think services also have a lot of unknowns when it comes to SaaS opportunities, right? Like we might throw something over to you where you don't understand what's the scope of this, how well has this been vetted out, and vice versa, right? So I think that's also just kind of an issue with the pure referral side of things. Is it's kind of a crapshoot of what you're going to get from the partner in that sense.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to make a comment on, was from the lens of a services firm, getting asked to introduce our clients, which are typically longer, right? Like a services firm is, part of it, it's 5-10 years, and you may not be working with the same people, but there's that trust that's been built up, and to have the paradigm be in this partnership, just introduce me to your clients and I'll give you a cut of the deal, right? That it totally dissolves that trusted advisor relationship, and it's almost more of a conflict of interest, right? To be paid for your people, right? Like, and so that's just what, through that lens, let alone, having the skills to even deliver something, right? If we're talking high complexity things like data and analytics or machine learning, having that ability to, the skill sets, across my teams, having, to go through and train them, like there's a lot to unpack there in building a practice around a particular software stack that just typically isn't being addressed, through referrals.
Yep, I totally agree.
Yeah. And one specific example comes to mind, and I think at this point we could probably transition to what, I think we've talked about the problems here, and I think we can talk about, what we ended up actually doing. But, one specific example that I remember distinctly is, we had won a year-long implementation. We had referred in a company that would be a part of this implementation, to be the core foundation that we would be working on. And I think that project, generated, call it $2 million, but after a year, we had registered the deal with the SaaS provider, which was one of the many different moving parts. And we get a check in the mail for, I think it was like $17,000. Now, that's a lot of money. And that gesture is definitely appreciated. We're not in the business of turning down money. None of us are. But at the same time, does that really drive behavioral changes? Does that incentivize both companies to come and work together, in the future? And I'm not sure that it does exactly. That $17,000 might be, better repurposed in some other way, either within the software company, or with a proof of concept at another, potential client or something like that. It could be invested totally differently.
Yeah, I so agree. When it's a $2 million scope like that, the 17,000, like you said, it's appreciated, but kind of a drop in the bucket. And there's probably a better way to take that money and invest in the partnership.
Yeah. Well, it's almost like it's intended for an individual. If an individual got a $70,000, I mean, that's a pretty big deal. But you're looking at a partner, at a practice, at a lot of different moving parts, and so it's almost like it's intended, for that. It's, if it were an individual sales rep, for example. And so I wanted to transition a little bit here, into how we ended up, rethinking our partnership. And, given that we're, again, we're in this, more of a high complexity space where we're talking about machine learning, and we're talking about, a little bit more of an emergent technologies, it is a little bit tough to, to rationalize value and things like that. I wanted to start stepping into how did we start to, tell us the story about how we started to recognize, we wanted to start looking outside of referrals, and we wanted to start maybe looking more broadly.
Yeah, and I know that, like you said, we met through the AWS ecosystem, which was really helpful for us to make that connection. But then, yeah, I think once we started to dive into it, a problem that my company was having from a SaaS perspective is that the customers that we were working with didn't understand the full scope of the investment that they needed for the sort of things that they were trying to do. So for them, not everybody, but the number of people we talked to, we're thinking that AI ML is just like magic. You hire one data scientist and you give them data and then you'll get results. And that's definitely not how this process goes. And I know that that's the same for many other industries as well, not just machine learning, right? SaaS is
Mhm.
one piece of the puzzle, usually a cog in the entire wheel of what they're trying, finding Pariveda, who's specifically what we called in our company a boutique services firm, because you guys had a specialization that complemented our
Yeah.
SaaS products so much. Finding you all and having the breadth of knowledge that we could bring in when we were selling at the same time our product was really, really helpful. We really were able to kind of legitimize each other's business by expressing enough of like, this is actually the amount of investment that you need to do the project that you have. If you don't have the in-house talent, we know a company that's really good and set for this. And I think, we were able to not only close more deals, but then also upsell and work with like a longer term relationship than with some of these customers as well.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that we came to the conclusion was that, that we were kind of representing two archetypes or business models, that our two companies were constructed off of, and they're very different, right? So um, we looked at our value propositions, we looked at like the core activities that we were doing, and we also looked at how we approached customer relationships. Um, both were very different, right? However, looking at a mutual customer, they would become very complementary, and so there was that value add above and beyond just simply trading account intros and things like that. That we were able to like see how you can sort of address that the holistic need of that customer. Um, what I think was also really interesting was that we had to break through how different and conflicting our revenue streams were. Right, you're
Mhm.
coming from a SaaS company where you're trying to sign up a subscription, a long-term commit, on a monthly or a quarterly or yearly basis. Whereas we're trying to have teams and resources be deployed with them at a billable hourly rate. And so those cost structures, and the revenue streams were actually completely misaligned. So I think that was actually really the genesis of this model that we created, and the realization that we needed to look a little bit bigger than the sales funnel. And so I don't know if you recall, but we ended up landing on the whole customer journey, right? Is where we landed. And so we kind of looked at what touch points made the most sense, and we ended up making kind of a lightweight framework. Um, Looking at everything from demand gen, from sales, implementation and onboarding, customer success, advocacy, things like that. Um, we looked at the KPIs, the personas, um, the different friction, the blockers that these different personas were having. And ultimately, right, trying to figure out, what complementary aspects in this partnership, could we deploy in order to ultimately lift those
Mhm.
KPIs. And so, from your, I wanted you to touch on, there was one specific account that I think was particularly successful where, as a strategy, we had found a lot of opportunity to cross this entire customer journey. Do you want to maybe dig in a little bit there in terms of what you think worked well using that sort of framework of the whole customer journey?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, because we looked at that larger journey, one company comes in mind in particular that's one of the larger automotive manufacturers that we happen to both be working in separately. And with that one, when you get into a more enterprise global space, the companies can be so siloed, right? So there could be so many different teams, and some of them may even be working on the same thing and they just don't even realize it within the same company. So when we started to looking at that larger customer journey, we were able to figure out that, we're working with these different teams for very different projects, but we were able to then leverage each other's contacts that we had within that same company to legitimize ourselves via the customer itself, basically saying, you're already working with this SaaS company over here, or you're already working with that services company over there. And then we were able to take that information and then actually bring it together where this company started to learn, like, wow, we can start to consolidate some of our efforts and look at this more holistically rather than just the different silos. And so not only was that really helpful, I would say, from both the services and SaaS side, but then that's ultimately, the customer itself is getting a lot of value out of what we brought
Absolutely.
together at the table. And then from a sales perspective from both of our ends, I mean, this was most successful in, like I said, that enterprise global space, and that's where a lot of salespeople really want to try to get into anyway. So I thought that that's where I think that both of our companies were starting to really see the value of kind of this larger picture approach that we were taking to our partnerships.
Yeah, I love that. And it's not, again, even going back to the reason I love that story is because going back to what we were saying in the beginning, it's not just cutting the pie up, that's truly helping to grow the pie for ourselves, but also, right, deploying sophisticated, well-orchestrated machine learning for our clients is helping them get their competitive advantage as well. And so it's just, that's exactly the type of, partnership that, I'm glad we were able to build together. Through,
and like
it's almost an aspect of like design thinking, right? Like it took a lot. No, go ahead. Yeah, it's almost an aspect of design thinking to to really think about the customer's needs and plug in where our strengths are. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And then also the nice thing too, like we were mentioning earlier about, our different sales motions and potentially salespeople worried about, losing business or something by having a partner in here. Really what we were able to do is we weren't taking over each other's key contacts and we weren't taking over each other's sales motions. We were really able to look at this together and still kind of work in tandem on accounts to have that better overall solution.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, we left our own processes in place, but we found ways to orchestrate without disrupting all the different roles and the different things that we have going on.
Exactly.
Awesome. And I have a couple of, we actually did quite a bit of sketching when we designed this partnership. And so I have plenty of, I'm not going to do any screen shares, but if anybody is particularly interested in seeing the types of the frameworks and tools that we built on, we're happy to have a conversation about that and show you, how we ultimately came to, this design that we landed on. It wasn't particularly a great name, but we called it the partner canvas, right? Where it's really just thinking about how those two business models fit together and where we were able to find synergies. So, I mean, with that, I think we're kind of coming to the end of this webinar. We can certainly open it up for questions. I wanted to leave with just really three main recommendations or three findings that we had, throughout this journey of introductions in the AWS ecosystem and designing our partnership to add more value. I think the first sort of point I wanted to make was that, recognizing that the value of business ecosystems isn't necessarily efficiency, right? It's the ability to capture new knowledge and to learn and to innovate across organizational boundaries. I mean, that was something I think we anchored on, particularly, in looking at the customer journey. And I think there's like a fundamental tension there between streamlining and in making your operations and your sales pipeline this supply chain like highly mature, fast moving pipeline that is needed to scale efficiently. And so there's sort of a delicate balance there between embracing knowledge, pulling in new things, and innovating with becoming really operationally efficient. But the point there is that I think that this knowledge harvesting happens best when you diversify and when you decentralize all these different partner conversations. Some of the best insights we had were when we were talking to solution architects and TAMs and CSMs, outside of those traditional points of failure, like partner success managers, where everything is flowing through them. We embraced opening up the conversations a little bit more and equipping, the teams on both sides of our partnership to embrace the ambiguities, to understand how our partners operate, and what I mentioned earlier, that whole product, understanding how partnerships, play into that whole product that we're trying to build. So that was kind of one of the first points, that we wanted to make. Christy, do you want to talk a little bit about the metrics and what we came to the conclusion on around metrics?
Yeah, so with metrics, I mean, instead of just looking at it, like we said, about that referral back and forth, I think really expanding the way that we measure things and how we evaluate things in more of a, how are we going to grow our customers? How are we going to keep them more, retain our customers and look at those renewals? I think that that's really what we need to look at. And that's actually probably why Andrew and I really looked at more the customer success teams and trying to help out, building beyond the single sale that we had done initially. And so this is, I think, the best way to leverage partners. I know from the SaaS perspective, especially, sometimes our CS teams would be constantly reaching out to a customer and be like, so your subscription's coming up, and we're still just providing that one piece of value, where pulling in a services company can really provide so much more value. So reevaluating how you look at the metrics for your partner success, I think, is really important. And that looking especially at that growth, retention, renewals, and then their overall satisfaction, I think, is where we found the most success.
Yeah, I love that. Instead of just looking at the partner influenced revenue and the partner referred revenue, it's like, how are my customers growing their consumption, assuming you're this high complexity, consumption based or adoption based, headcount based, are customers with partner attach growing, their usage faster? And I would argue probably yes. If you have more touch points, more hands-on, more feet on the ground helping out, that, no doubt that, you'll be capturing those little micro touch points where somebody might be blocked, and they, and a partner is able to come in and help. And then lastly, the last point we wanted to make before we open it up for questions here is being really crisp about the partner capabilities, and going back to what Christy was saying about communication and it being a grind, but being crisp about partner capabilities and plays, and frankly, embedding them, within the direct sales playbooks. You could call them SKUs, but they include everything about the value proposition, the incentives. And that's actually an interesting point, is that, Christy and I got really creative with the incentives too, in a way to really incentivize, to get the different roles. You have to think about the different roles and how, what's meaningful to them, how are they gold, and then calibrate incentives to that. But also, calling them partner engagement plays, and where I think this is essentially going is, what I'd call partner product management, as a capability that we're essentially recommending SaaS companies start to focus on. I've started to see a little bit more of those job descriptions listed, but I think that, going back to the whole product idea, is having somebody within the partner org that is not just sales focused, but that is focused on how do we extend our product through partners, and design, engagement plays that, extend beyond the organizational boundaries. So those were really the three key points. Christy, was there anything else I missed there that you wanted to chime in on?
No. Thanks for inviting me to this. If anybody else has any questions for us, you can always reach out outside of this podcast and webinar as well. But I feel like we had a very unique approach to partnerships that was really successful, and one that was not typical of any of the other services companies that we had reached out to and started to work with. So thanks for letting us share our experience here.
Yeah, thanks for joining, Christy, and obviously thank you to the CSA for giving us this platform to have this conversation. Well, thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for your time. If you'd like to connect, you can find us both on LinkedIn. If you'd like to chat more during SaaS Connect in a couple of weeks, feel free to reach out. But again, thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.